Orion 7 was not an ordinary planet. From a distance, it seemed peaceful, a tiny dot of life tucked away at the very edge of the galaxy where no one bothered to look. Its landscapes were diverse and beautiful, with rolling plains that glimmered under two suns, dense forests where the air was filled with the soft hum of alien wildlife, and sparkling rivers that cut through valleys like silver ribbons. Mountains crowned the horizon, their peaks piercing the sky and giving the world an almost ethereal look. For generations, humans who had settled on Orion 7 believed they were isolated from the rest of civilization, a distant outpost where danger was nothing more than a story told by traveling traders or old, half-forgotten history books. The planet was home to thousands of families who had adapted to the environment over decades. They had built towns and cities that merged technology with nature. Domed habitats dotted the landscape, protecting citizens from occasional storms that swept through the open plains, and underground networks connected entire communities, allowing people to travel safely without being exposed to the planet's harsher conditions. Life on Orion 7 was simple but fulfilling. Children grew up learning about the stars, building small spacecraft for recreation, and listening to stories of faraway planets where humans had fought wars, discovered strange creatures, or pioneered unknown technologies. Adults were skilled in a mix of old and new ways: farming, engineering, and occasionally small-scale scientific research. Everyone knew the other families, and a sense of shared responsibility existed. Life was quiet, almost idyllic, but it was this very quiet that masked the fragility of their existence. The citizens of Orion 7 believed firmly in one thing: no threat could ever reach them here. Communication with the rest of the galaxy was rare. The old satellites, left behind from the first waves of human expansion, barely functioned, and only sent messages that arrived months or years later. Faster than light signals, once considered the backbone of interstellar communication, often failed entirely in this sector of space. The idea that a war fleet or an invading force could traverse this distance seemed impossible, and so the people of Orion 7 lived in comfort, trusting that their distance was their protection. They had never experienced war, had never seen the devastation that other human colonies had endured, and believed they never would. In their minds they were safe, and safety had become a way of life. They had created routines, festivals, and cultural traditions that reflected their belief in security and peace. Markets bustled with activity, schools thrived, and community gatherings were frequent. Every citizen played a role, from engineers maintaining communication satellites to children helping in community farms. Life was predictable, calm, and shielded by their isolation. But Orion 7 had its secrets, relics of the past that few remembered. Deep in the central square of the capital city stood a small, nondescript building, unremarkable except for a single metal box in its basement. That box contained an emergency beacon, left behind by the first human pioneers who had colonized this remote sector. Unlike the sophisticated satellites and communication networks that humans had used for decades, this beacon was primitive. It had been designed to send a signal across vast distances, even if it took years, and even if the universe seemed indifferent. Most citizens had forgotten it existed. Experts dismissed it as a relic, something only worth studying for historical purposes. But the pioneers had intended it to be humanity's lifeline in case of true disaster, a last resort if all else failed. In times of peace, it was nothing more than an antique, a symbol of humanity's boldness and foresight. No one thought it would ever be used. That sense of safety was shattered in ways no one could have imagined. On a day that began like any other, the skies above Orion 7 darkened up with clouds of storms, but with massive ships larger than anything the colonists had ever seen. The Clavor Empire, a species infamous across nearby star systems for its ruthless conquests, had arrived. Their ships were enormous, black and jagged, bristling with weapons designed to destroy entire cities in minutes. From orbit, they looked like predators circling a helpless prey. And from the ground, the sight inspired a mixture of awe and terror. That Clavor were relentless, and unlike anything Orion 7 had prepared for. No drills, no weapons, no fortifications could truly defend against this level of assault. Panic spread through the colony faster than any alarm could. Families rushed to shelters, schools emptied as children clung to parents, and the calm, orderly streets transformed into chaos. Citizens who had spent their entire lives believing they were safe suddenly found themselves facing annihilation. The sense of isolation that had once been comforting became terrifying. For the first time, every human on the planet realized just how vulnerable they truly were. In those initial hours, confusion reigned. Leaders tried to organize defenses, but they were unprepared. Their ships were few and outdated, their weapons insufficient to match the advanced Clavor technology. Engineers scrambled to repair communication devices, hoping desperately that some distant human fleet would respond to their calls. Hospitals became crowded as people were injured in random skirmishes and panic-driven accidents. Streets that had once been filled with children playing and vendors selling goods were now battlegrounds. Smoke rose from burning buildings, and explosions echoed across the valleys and plains. Everyone realized that the quiet life they had cherished had vanished in an instant. Fear was no longer theoretical, it was a tangible, living thing that gripped the hearts of every citizen. Amid this chaos, one glimmer of hope remained: the emergency beacon. A few brave engineers and historians who remembered the stories of the ancient pioneers rushed to the central building, retrieved the relic, and began activating it. Every step of the process was tense. The beacon was fragile, old, and finicky. Wires sparked, circuits groaned under the strain, and there was no certainty it would work at all. As the Clavor destroyed another city district nearby, the engineers persisted, driven by the barest chance of salvation. This was humanity's last hope, a desperate attempt to reach out across the galaxy and send one single, clear message: we are under attack, we need help. The thought of the beacon not working at all was unbearable. Yet, every citizen, whether hiding in underground shelters, helping the wounded, or attempting to fight back, held onto that tiny shred of hope. It was all they had as the day wore on. The colonists of Orion 7 faced another harsh truth. They were alone, at least for the moment. Every attempt at communication with the outer colonies failed. Satellites relayed messages slowly or not at all, and every signal bounced into the void unanswered. The Clavor seemed unstoppable, moving methodically to eliminate resistance. Families huddled together, and children asked questions no parent could fully answer. The reality was undeniable. Without help, they were at the mercy of an empire that had no compassion, no reason to spare them. Yet, even in the face of overwhelming danger, the people of Orion 7 began to organize themselves. Communities formed, small resistance groups, citizens shared resources, and engineers improvised defenses wherever they could. While the beacon was humanity's last chance, the will to survive became the driving force on the ground. Courage, fear, and determination mingled in every citizen, shaping the first hours of the battle for survival. The beauty of Orion, its peaceful landscapes and vibrant forests, now contrasted sharply with the horrors of war. Smoke and fire marred the skies, and the once serene rivers reflected the chaos below. Yet even amid destruction, the colonists noticed small acts of heroism: a teenager guiding younger children to safety, an elderly engineer repairing a makeshift communication line, neighbors helping neighbors despite their own fear. These acts reminded them that humanity was more than just technology, more than weapons or defenses. It was courage, unity, and the will to endure. The emergency beacon, though ancient and nearly forgotten, became a symbol of that enduring spirit. It represented not just a call for help, but the refusal of humanity to accept defeat without a fight. By the end of that long day, Orion 7 had changed forever. The calm, idyllic life that had defined generations was gone, replaced by a desperate struggle to survive. Families understood that the galaxy was larger, harsher, and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. They also learned, even if only subconsciously, that hope could take many forms. It might be a flickering signal sent across impossibly long distances. It could be an act of courage from a stranger. Or it could simply be the determination to keep fighting even when all seems lost. In the hearts of Orion 7's people, a new understanding began to grow. Survival was not guaranteed, but giving up was never an option. As night fell on the battered cities, the engineers continued their work on the beacon, and the citizens clung to whatever hope remained. Fires illuminated the streets, shadows danced on broken walls, and the distant hum of Clavor ships reminded everyone of the danger above. Yet, within that darkness, there was a quiet determination, an invisible bond linking every human on the planet. They had lived their lives believing the galaxy was too far away to notice them, but now they knew that even the most remote human outposts could reach for help, could fight, and could survive. And somewhere in the vast emptiness beyond the stars, the beacon's signal began its journey, a thread of hope stretching across the impossible distance to the rest of humanity. The days following the sudden Clavor attack on Orion 7 were some of the hardest anyone had ever experienced. The colonists quickly realized that the initial chaos of the invasion was only the beginning. While the first hours were terrifying, they were still manageable. People ran, hid, and survived by sheer luck or quick thinking. But as the days stretched on, it became clear that the danger was more serious and the situation far worse than anyone could have imagined. That Clavor were not just raiding for resources, they intended to take control of the planet, erase any resistance, and make it a permanent part of their empire. This understanding, once it sank in, caused a collective dread to spread among the colonists, a weight heavier than fear because it carried the knowledge that time was running out. At first, people tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. Leaders organized councils, trying to strategize ways to defend cities or protect civilians. Schools, although damaged, tried to remain functioning, at least for those children who could safely attend. Families attempted to ration supplies, make improvised shelters, and care for the injured. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly, repairing communications, strengthening barricades, and modifying old weapons to make them more effective against Clavor technology. Despite all these efforts, the truth was harsh. Orion 7's defenses were nowhere near sufficient. The planet had been peaceful for so long that its military knowledge, ships, and weapons were outdated. Their systems were designed for emergencies like natural storms or technical malfunctions, not for a full-scale assault from a superior interstellar military force. Every defensive plan was fragile, every preparation partial, and the colonists knew it, even if they tried to ignore it. As the days passed, the invasion revealed the Clavors' merciless efficiency. Their ships, massive and heavily armed, patrolled the skies constantly. Drones scoured the ground, tracking any movement and identifying potential resistance members. Cities were systematically attacked, infrastructure destroyed, and supply lines cut. The planet's power grids were hit, leaving neighborhoods in darkness, which added to the fear and confusion. Water and food supplies were targeted, creating shortages that forced people to make difficult choices. Families who once had everything now scavenged through rubble to find what little they could. Even the most resourceful citizens felt powerless. The sense of isolation deepened. They were truly on their own. Every signal they sent to distant human colonies went unanswered. Every call for help seemed to vanish into the void. The initial hope from activating the old beacon faded with each passing hour without response. Despite these circumstances, the colonists refused to give up entirely. Groups of engineers, soldiers, and volunteers formed small resistance cells, each focused on different strategies. Some concentrated on evacuation plans, some on guerrilla-style defense, and others on intelligence gathering to learn the enemy's weaknesses. Every decision was critical because mistakes could cost lives. Resistance members would move quietly through bombed-out streets at night, repairing broken machinery, rescuing trapped civilians, and attempting to sabotage Clavor supply lines. It was exhausting work, and many did it knowing they might never survive the day. Fear was constant, but it was tempered with determination. People had to remind themselves that their actions, no matter how small, could make a difference. The psychological strain on the colonists was immense. Children could no longer play freely. They learned to hide in shelters at the first sign of a ship overhead. Parents constantly worried, balancing the need to protect their family with the pressing necessity to contribute to the survival effort. Even adults who had once been confident and capable felt the creeping terror of helplessness. There were moments of despair, when the sheer size of the Clavor fleet seemed too much to fight, when the emptiness of the sky above reminded them of the impossibility of rescue. Yet the same people found courage in unexpected ways. Citizens risked everything to deliver food, carry the wounded to safety, and defend their homes with whatever weapons they could improvise. Every act of bravery, no matter how small, became a thread holding the community together. The colony's infrastructure, already limited, struggled under constant attack. Communication networks failed repeatedly, making coordination between resistance cells difficult. Engineers worked frantically, patching broken links, restoring power to critical areas, and attempting to send updates about the situation on the ground. Each successful connection was a victory, but every failure reminded them of their vulnerability. The ancient SOS beacon remained their only hope for reinforcements from beyond the system, but even it had limitations. The signal traveled slowly, and whether it would reach anyone capable of helping remained uncertain. This uncertainty was both a source of hope and frustration. People clung to it desperately, activating it, recalibrating it, and praying it would work. It became the symbol of their last chance, the lifeline in a sea of hopelessness. That Clavor's presence on the planet created a constant state of fear. They moved methodically, controlling strategic points, cutting off escape routes, and eliminating potential resistance leaders. There was no mercy for those caught trying to fight back, and their brutality was designed to instill panic. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed as an example to others, and the citizens realized that hiding was not enough. They needed to fight intelligently if they wanted to survive. Resistance members adapted, learning to move silently, strike quickly, and disappear before the Clavor could respond. They observed enemy patterns, predicted movements, and coordinated small strikes against supply depots. Each small victory was precious, not because it could win the war, but because it kept hope alive. Supply shortages created additional challenges. Food, clean water, and medical supplies dwindled rapidly. Families shared what little they had, sometimes going days without proper meals. Medicine was especially scarce, and makeshift clinics had to improvise with whatever was available. Injuries sustained in skirmishes or during bombings became dangerous simply because treatment was limited. Colonists became creative in ways they never imagined, using local plants for medicine, building makeshift shelters from wreckage, and reusing old technology to repair weapons. These improvisations showcased the resilience and ingenuity of humans in the face of overwhelming adversity. The social dynamics of the colony also shifted under pressure. Old disputes and rivalries were put aside, and a sense of unity emerged among citizens. Leaders who had once been mostly symbolic suddenly found themselves making life or death decisions. Decisions were often controversial, sometimes even risky, but they were necessary. Families relied on neighbors they barely knew, forming new bonds forged in shared survival. Trust became a currency as valuable as any resource. People learned to respect skills and knowledge, whether from engineers, strategists, or even young children who could navigate the terrain better than adults. This collective adaptation and cooperation became the foundation of the colony's ability to resist. Perhaps most importantly, The colonists learned to balance fear with action. Panic could paralyze a person, but it could also drive them to incredible feats of courage. Parents carried children across open streets under fire. Resistance fighters sabotaged enemy machinery despite near-certain death. And volunteers kept working even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. Each act of bravery, no matter how small, created ripples of hope that spread through the community. People began to understand that survival was not only about avoiding the clove, it was about actively shaping the outcome through effort, courage, and cooperation. As the days stretched into weeks, the colonies' morale wavered constantly. Some nights were filled with despair, others with determination. The sight of the Clavor fleet in orbit was a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Yet the colonists refused to surrender mentally. Even in the darkest moments, they acted. The old emergency beacon remained their guiding light, representing a fragile hope that help might arrive. They repaired it, activated it, and prayed silently that the signal would be received by other humans in the galaxy. It was not just a machine, it was a statement. Orion 7 had not given up, and neither would its people. Meanwhile, stories began to spread among the colonists of small victories. Resistance fighters ambushed supply drops, saved trapped civilians, or outsmarted patrols. These stories were shared quietly at first, then more openly, inspiring others to take action. The colony learned that even small acts could make a difference and that courage was contagious. People began to see that hope was not just something waiting to arrive from afar. It was created in the choices they made every day, the risks they were willing to take, and the unity they maintained in the face of fear. Even as despair threatened to dominate, the colonists of Orion 7 adapted to their new reality. Their world had changed from a peaceful, isolated paradise to a battleground of survival. The rising challenge of the Clavor invasion forced every human to confront their limitations, overcome fear, and embrace resilience. Engineers, leaders, and ordinary citizens alike discovered depths of creativity and bravery they never knew they possessed. And through it all, the hope represented by the ancient SOS beacon remained alive. A fragile but powerful reminder that, even in the direst circumstances, survival was possible. Orion 7 had transformed. Its citizens were no longer naive or sheltered. They were survivors, fighters, and strategists. They had faced overwhelming challenges, learned to cooperate under pressure, and found courage in the most unlikely moments. Yet the ultimate test was still ahead. The Clavor fleet remained a looming threat, and the fate of the colony depended not only on their resilience but also on whether their desperate call for help would finally reach someone capable of saving them. In these moments of uncertainty, the people of Orion 7 learned the meaning of perseverance, the power of unity, and the fragile yet enduring spark of hope. The situation on Orion 7 reached a turning point as the days turned into weeks. The Clavor Empire, methodical and relentless, who had established near-complete control over the planet's surface, and the colonists realized that small resistance efforts, though courageous, were no longer enough to stop the enemy. Every skirmish, every act of sabotage, slowed the invaders only temporarily. But Clavor had superior technology, superior numbers, and a strategic understanding of planetary conquest that humans had never encountered. The quiet, isolated world that once felt secure now teetered on the brink of annihilation, and it became painfully clear to everyone that the coming hours might determine the ultimate fate of the colony. The people of Orion 7 had already faced fear, hunger, and loss, but now they were confronting something far more insidious. The realization that the planet could be completely destroyed before help arrived. Leaders and resistance fighters convened in hidden bunkers, working tirelessly to plan what they called the final stand. There was no illusion that victory was possible in the conventional sense. The goal was to survive long enough to protect as many civilians as possible, to buy time, and to continue sending the SOS signal through the ancient beacon. Every moment became a delicate calculation of risk versus reward. Moving a group of civilians to safety might save lives, but it could expose another group to Clavor patrols. Launching a small counterattack could disrupt enemy activity, but the odds of survival were slim. Children and elderly were the first priority. Hidden shelters had been reinforced deep underground, tunnels mapped out for emergency evacuation, and food and water supplies carefully rationed. Volunteers worked tirelessly to stock these safe zones while others prepared to defend them if discovered. Families huddled together, whispering reassurances even when they were terrified. Parents, who had once worried about school lessons or minor accidents, now faced the unimaginable task of keeping their children alive in the shadow of a conquering empire. Fear was constant, but it was tempered by determination. The colonists understood that panic would not save anyone. Meanwhile, resistance fighters had begun coordinating their actions with remarkable precision. They had learned from the early encounters that the Clavor were predictable in their efficiency but not infallible. The resistance studied enemy patrol patterns, noted weaknesses in their movements, and planned small, targeted strikes. These were not large-scale battles, they were quick, surgical interventions meant to delay the invaders and disrupt supply lines. Fighters would strike under the cover of darkness, setting explosives to destroy enemy transport vehicles, or create diversions to allow civilians to escape. Every action was meticulously timed, often at great personal risk, and each success, however minor, became a symbol of hope for the community. But even as these efforts continued, the Clavora adapted. They increased patrols, set traps, and began targeting known resistance members. They unleashed drones equipped with scanners capable of detecting movement underground, and used psychological tactics to break the spirit of the colonists. Families were separated. People who had been working together were suddenly forced apart. Rumors spread, some true, some false, adding confusion and fear to the already tense atmosphere. Civilians learned quickly that trust had to be earned anew every day, and decisions that once seemed simple now carried profound consequences. The situation escalated further when the Clavor began targeting critical infrastructure. Power stations were bombed, leaving large areas of the planet in darkness. Water purification systems were sabotaged, forcing the colonists to ration what little clean water remained. Medical centers were destroyed, leaving the injured vulnerable and without care. Communication systems were disrupted, making coordination among resistance cells far more difficult. Every attack was carefully designed to weaken morale and limit the colonists' capacity to organize. What had once been a community that could rely on each other was now forced to operate in fragmented groups, each facing its own challenges. Amid all this, the SOS beacon remained humanity's fragile hope. Engineers and volunteers worked continuously to maintain it, ensuring that its signals could reach beyond the edge of the galaxy. Every failed attempt to communicate with human core worlds was demoralizing, yet they persisted. The beacon became more than a machine. It was a symbol of their will to survive, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they could reach out for help. The people clung to this hope, knowing that without it, their chances were slim. At the same time, the uncertainty of whether anyone would ever receive the signal weighed heavily on them. Each day without response made the threat feel more insurmountable, and yet, giving up was never an option. The critical moment approached when intelligence indicated that the Clavor were preparing a final assault on the remaining resistance strongholds. Entire districts were designated for destruction to force the population into submission. The invaders' strategy was ruthless. They sought to eliminate leadership, destroy morale, and secure complete control. Every colonist understood that the next attack could wipe out hundreds, perhaps thousands, of lives in a matter of hours. The urgency of preparation intensified. Bunkers were reinforced, escape routes carefully mapped, and volunteers drilled repeatedly on emergency procedures. There was no room for error, and everyone knew it. During this time, acts of extraordinary bravery emerged from unexpected quarters. Citizens who had never considered themselves heroes stepped forward. A teenage boy led a group of children through a partially destroyed tunnel system, avoiding Clavor drones and patrols. An elderly engineer repaired a critical communication line despite exposure to enemy fire, ensuring that the SOS beacon continued transmitting. Families who had lost homes or loved ones banded together to protect others, carrying food and water through dangerous zones. These acts, though small in the scope of the battle, became crucial in sustaining the colony's morale. Courage spread like a contagion, reinforcing the notion that even when defeat seemed inevitable, resistance was possible. Despite these individual successes, the pressure mounted to an almost unbearable level. The Clavor's final attack was imminent, and there was a tangible sense that the planet's fate hung in the balance. The air was tense, filled with the constant hum of enemy ships, explosions, and alarms. Civilians huddled in shelters, listening to distant destruction, while fighters prepared their positions for the inevitable confrontation. Every decision had consequences, and every movement carried risk. There was no safety, only strategy and hope. As the countdown to the assault continued, Orion 7 citizens reflected on their lives and the stakes of their struggle. Memories of peaceful days, of markets, festivals, and laughter contrasted sharply with the present chaos. Yet these memories were not merely nostalgic, they became a source of strength. The colonists were fighting not just for survival, but to preserve the world they loved. Each bunker reinforced, each civilian protected, and each small victory against the Clavor carried the weight of everything they had built over generations. The escalation reached its peak when the Clover launched a coordinated strike targeting multiple resistance hubs simultaneously. Explosions rocked the capital city, fires spread across the plains, and drones hunted survivors with relentless precision. The colony's fighters engaged with extraordinary determination, holding back the invaders long enough for civilians to escape to safer zones. It was a desperate, chaotic battle where courage and ingenuity mattered more than strength. Improvised weapons, clever traps, and intimate knowledge of the terrain allowed the resistance to survive, even as the invaders' power threatened to overwhelm them. During this critical moment, the SOS beacon became the linchpin of hope. Engineers, exhausted and fearful, ensured that the signal continued to transmit. Each pulse carried the plea for help across the vast emptiness of space. The colonists understood that their survival depended not just on their own actions, but on the possibility that anyone beyond the galaxy would hear their call. The beacon became a lifeline, connecting the isolated world to the greater human civilization that seemed impossibly distant. Asterisk. As night fell on the planet, the final assault loomed. Fires lit the horizon, smoke filled the valleys, and the sounds of distant combat echoed across the plains. Civilians remained hidden in shelters, gripping each other tightly, while fighters took up positions on rooftops, in tunnels, and along damaged streets. The critical moment had arrived, the moment when all previous efforts, all preparation, and all hope would be tested. Survival was no longer about avoiding danger. It was about confronting it with everything the colonists had learned and possessed on these hours. Ariane 7's citizens demonstrated the full measure of human resilience. Despite exhaustion, fear, and overwhelming odds, they acted with determination and courage. Every action, whether large or small, was crucial in the effort to resist the Clavor invasion. The resistance fighters' coordinated strikes, the volunteers' tireless support, and the civilians' courage in hiding all combined to create a fragile but vital defense. It was the culmination of days of rising challenge, a critical moment that would determine not only the fate of the colony, but also the survival of the people themselves. The night stretched on, the horizon glowing with the fire of enemy attacks, and yet in the shadows, small victories continued. Civilians were rescued, supply lines were disrupted, and the beacon kept transmitting. Even as the Clavor sought to crush every last spark of hope, Orion Savant's people held fast, their courage and determination shining through the darkness. The critical moment, though terrifying and dangerous, revealed the strength, resilience, and ingenuity of a population facing near impossible odds. Through this escalation, it became clear that the colonists were no longer passive victims. They had adapted, learned, and acted with bravery, determination, and intelligence. Every step taken to protect civilians, every strategic strike, and every effort to maintain communication contributed to a larger story of survival. And while the outcome of this critical moment was still uncertain, the people of Orion 7 had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could fight back, resist, and cling to hope. Asterisk. As the critical moment of the Clavor assault reached its peak, the people of Orion 7 braced for what seemed like the end. Fires lit up the horizon, smoke thickened in the valleys, and the sounds of destruction echoed through the plains and cities. Civilians huddled in shelters, clutching one another, praying that this nightmare would pass. Resistance fighters moved through the chaos with quiet determination, their faces set in expressions of grim resolve. They had done everything possible to protect the people and disrupt the enemy. But now it seemed as though nothing could stop the overwhelming might of the Clavor Empire. The colony's future hung by a thread, and hope was scarce. It was then that the first signs of salvation appeared, subtle at first, almost unnoticeable amid the chaos. A faint ripple in the sky, a shimmering distortion across the stars above, caught the attention of a few sharp-eyed observers. At first they thought it was a trick of the light, an illusion born of exhaustion and stress. But as moments passed, the distortion grew larger, more defined, until it became unmistakable. Something massive was approaching, emerging from hyperspace at an impossible speed. Scouts and resistance fighters, familiar with the emptiness of this sector of the galaxy, could scarcely believe their eyes. Ships appeared where no ships should have been, moving with a precision and power that dwarfed the Clavor. Vessels. The arrival of the fleet was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Ships designed for the deadliest worlds, built to survive conditions that would destroy most technology, cut through space toward the planet. Their hulls gleamed with reinforced armor. Energy shields crackled along their surfaces, and weapon systems were clearly visible, pulsing with lethal potential. The fleet's movements were deliberate, coordinated, and purposeful. It was the unmistakable presence of the human Deathworlder warfleet, the very force that Ariane 7 had only heard of in legends and stories. Citizens and fighters alike stared at the approaching armada, their fear mingling with disbelief. After weeks of isolation and desperation, the impossible had happened. Help had arrived as the fleet entered orbit. The Clavor forces were the first to notice the threat. They had assumed that Ariane 7 was an isolated outpost, vulnerable and abandoned by the rest of humanity. They had never considered the possibility of reinforcements, especially not one capable of matching their own strength. Panic spread through the enemy ranks. Commanders issued frantic orders, but the human ships moved too quickly and too precisely. Clavor ships that had seemed invincible mere moments ago were now vulnerable. Explosions erupted across enemy vessels as the Deathworlders unleashed concentrated firepower, tearing through the attacking fleet with terrifying efficiency. Below, the colonists of Orion 7 could only watch, and families emerged cautiously from shelters. Resistance fighters paused in their desperate skirmishes, and all eyes turned to the sky. The magnitude of what they were witnessing was almost beyond comprehension. For weeks, they had fought with courage and determination, believing that they were utterly alone, that their SOS beacon might never be received. Now, in a sudden, overwhelming display of power, the very legends of humanity had arrived to turn the tide. Hope surged through every person on the planet, a wave of relief and renewed determination that they had not felt in days. The human fleet did not merely attack, it executed a precision strategy. Smaller assault ships deployed quickly, targeting Clavor command centers and communication hubs. Larger battleships moved to intercept enemy capital ships, neutralizing them before they could cause further destruction. From orbit, the Deathworlders coordinated with resistance forces on the ground. Using advanced sensors and communication systems, they guided fighters to the most critical points, helping them avoid ambushes and strike with maximum effectiveness. The resistance, exhausted and battered, now had the tools and intelligence to act decisively. Every battle fought during this period became a turning point. Clavor patrols attempting to push deeper into the cities were destroyed before they could reach civilians. Supply convoys meant to cut off human defenders were intercepted and annihilated. Even the most heavily fortified enemy positions fell to coordinated attacks, often without a single human casualty from the ground forces. The arrival of the Deathworlders had not only shifted the balance of power, it had effectively neutralized the enemy's advantage, giving Orion 7 a chance to survive in a way that had seemed impossible amidst the chaos. The leaders of the colony began to understand the scale of their salvation. Engineers and volunteers who had risked everything to keep the SOS beacon operational now realized that their desperate efforts had paid off. The beacon had been received, and its message had called forth a fleet capable of turning the entire situation around. Gratitude and disbelief mingled with exhaustion as citizens reflected on what had occurred. The fleet's presence was a reminder that even the smallest, most isolated colony could reach out for help and be answered when hope was not abandoned. The climax of the battle saw the Deathworlder fleet engage the Clavor's largest vessels directly. The sky was filled with explosions, energy beams cutting through the darkness, and the roar of engines as ships maneuvered at incredible speeds. The Clavor attempted to regroup, but the combination of human firepower and tactical coordination proved overwhelming. Commanders were eliminated, forces scattered, and what had once seemed invincible was now crumbling. Below, resistance fighters moved with renewed confidence, striking remaining enemy positions and rescuing civilians trapped in the midst of destruction. The tides of battle shifted decisively in favor of humanity, and it became evident that Orion 7 would survive this onslaught. The resolution of the conflict was not instant, but it was decisive. Within hours, the Clavor forces that had threatened the planet were either destroyed, captured, or forced to retreat in disarray. Their ships, once dominating the skies, now lay in ruins, burning in orbit or scattered across the surface. Ground positions that had been contested for days fell under human control, and resistance fighters finally had the chance to rest and regroup. Civilians emerged from shelters to witness the aftermath. The destruction of their cities had been minimized by the timely intervention, and lives that seemed lost were saved by the arrival of the Deathworlder fleet. The psychological impact on the colonists was profound. Weeks of fear, hunger, and despair gave way to relief, gratitude, and renewed strength. Families hugged, children laughed cautiously, and resistance fighters who had fought with every ounce of courage finally allowed themselves to rest. The colony had survived, and the improbable intervention had saved them from what seemed inevitable. People reflected on the importance of unity, courage, and the will to survive. The crisis had tested every aspect of their humanity morale strategy, endurance, and resilience, and the outcome proved that even against overwhelming odds, hope and determination could prevail. Amid the celebrations and relief, practical matters demanded attention. Engineers and volunteers began restoring damaged infrastructure, rebuilding water and power systems, and clearing debris. Medical teams treated the wounded, repaired equipment, and ensured that supplies were distributed to those who needed them most. Leadership councils, once struggling under the pressure of imminent destruction, now coordinated recovery efforts and future defense strategies, even as the immediate threat had passed. The people of Orion 7 understood that preparation and vigilance remained essential. Survival was never guaranteed, but the intervention of the Deathworlders had given them a second chance. The SOS beacon, once considered an antiquated relic, had proven its value in the most extraordinary way. It had connected a desperate, isolated colony to the broader human civilization, demonstrating the importance of persistence and ingenuity in times of crisis. Engineers and historians marveled at the beacon's success, realizing that what had once seemed like a small, symbolic device had become the lifeline that saved thousands of lives. Citizens reflected on the importance of hope and foresight, understanding that even the simplest actions activating a forgotten device could have consequences far beyond imagination. The presence of the Deathworlder fleet also left a lasting impression on Orion 7 citizens. The sheer scale, power, and coordination of the human ships inspired awe and respect. Leaders of the colony studied the tactics used during the battle, learning how intelligence, strategy, and courage could multiply the effectiveness of even a small number of fighters. Children who had grown up hearing stories of human heroism now had a living example before their eyes. The lessons of courage, unity, and ingenuity became a foundation for the next generation, ensuring that the memory of survival would shape the culture and resilience of the planet for decades to come. In the days following the battle, the planet slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The fires were extinguished, the wounded were treated, and the surviving civilians began to rebuild their homes and lives. Resistance fighters transitioned from defense to recovery, helping repair infrastructure and ensuring that the Clavor threat was fully neutralized. Every citizen, regardless of age or occupation, participated in the effort to restore the planet. The sense of community that had been strained under the weight of invasion was now stronger than ever. People had witnessed firsthand the importance of cooperation, bravery, and the unbreakable will to survive. The resolution of the conflict marked a turning point, not only for Orion 7 but also for the wider perception of humanity in the galaxy. The intervention of the Deathworlder fleet demonstrated that humanity, even when seemingly distant and isolated, could respond decisively to threats and protect its own. Stories of Orion 7's survival spread across neighboring star systems, inspiring other colonies and reminding them that hope should never be abandoned, no matter how remote or isolated they might feel. The events on Orion 7 became a testament to the enduring spirit of humans, resilience in the face of adversity, courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and the power of connection across vast distances. Orion 7 had been saved from destruction, its people resilient and determined, and the Clavor threat neutralized. The arrival of the Deathworlders had not only changed the course of the battle but had reinforced the core values that defined humanity: bravery, unity, ingenuity, and an unwavering commitment to protect and survive. The resolution was not simply the end of a battle, it was the triumph of hope, the victory of determination over despair, and the beginning of a new chapter for a colony that had faced annihilation and emerged stronger than ever. The battle for Orion 7 was over, but the planet, its people, and their lives had changed forever. The once peaceful colony, which had been isolated on the edge of the galaxy, was now a place marked by both destruction and triumph. Fires that had scarred the plains and cities had finally been extinguished. Buildings that had once stood proud now lay in rubble, their skeletal remains a reminder of the ferocity of the Clavor invasion. Smoke had cleared, but the scent of battle lingered in the air. Streets were strewn with debris, and the scars of conflict were visible on every horizon. Yet, amid this devastation, a profound sense of relief, hope, and gratitude permeated the planet. Humanity had arrived just in time, and the colonists could finally begin the process of rebuilding, reflecting on everything that had happened, and learning lessons that would shape the future of Orion 7 forever. The first days after the battle were chaotic, but in a different way from the fighting. Now, instead of running from danger or scrambling to survive, citizens had to rebuild their lives from the ground up. Families searched through debris for belongings that had survived, while volunteers helped clear streets, repair damaged homes, and restore vital infrastructure. Medical teams worked tirelessly, treating not only the physical wounds inflicted by the Clavor but also the psychological trauma that had left so many shaken. Children who had witnessed explosions, panic, and death were now being comforted, taught that it was safe to smile, to play, and to hope again. The planet had survived because of courage, unity, and the intervention of the Deathworlder fleet, but recovery required equal determination and persistence. Engineers and scientists played a crucial role in this phase. They repaired power lines, restored water purification systems, and rebuilt communication networks that had been destroyed or disrupted. The ancient SOS beacon, once considered a relic, was carefully maintained as both a symbol of hope and a reminder of the power of preparation. Experts documented every step of the reconstruction process, ensuring that lessons learned during the invasion would inform future generations. Every repair, every effort to restore the colony's infrastructure, it became an act of resilience, a demonstration that Orion 7 would not simply survive, it would thrive again. The Deathworlder fleet, which had arrived so suddenly to turn the tide of battle, remained in orbit for a time, ensuring that the Clavor threat had been fully neutralized. Their presence provided reassurance to the colonists who could finally feel a sense of safety. Interactions between the fleet's personnel and the people of Orion 7 were marked by gratitude, curiosity, and mutual respect. Soldiers and engineers shared stories of past battles, offered guidance in rebuilding defenses, and trained local forces in new strategies. Civilians who had once viewed the Deathworlders as distant legends now saw them as protectors, mentors, and heroes. The presence of these extraordinary humans strengthened the colony's resolve and left an indelible mark on their collective memory. Communities that had been fractured during the invasion now began to come together in new ways. The shared experience of surviving such a catastrophic threat created bonds that transcended old divisions, disputes, or social hierarchies. Families who had lost homes or loved ones received support from neighbors, and collective efforts in rebuilding were organized through councils and volunteer groups. The unity that had emerged during the rising challenge in critical moments became the foundation of a stronger, more resilient society. People learned to value cooperation, to respect one another's skills and contributions, and to understand that survival depended not only on individual courage, but also on collective action. Education and storytelling became vital tools in the aftermath. Schools reopened, and lessons now included accounts of the invasion, the resistance, and the arrival of the Deathworlder fleet. Children learned about the courage of ordinary citizens who had risked everything to protect others, about the ingenuity of engineers who kept communication alive, and about the importance of hope even in the most dire circumstances. Elders recounted personal stories, emphasizing lessons of perseverance, unity, and vigilance. Through education, the colony ensured that the experiences of the invasion would not be forgotten and that future generations would be prepared, both mentally and practically, for any challenges they might face. Cultural shifts occurred as well. Memorials were established to honor those who had died, and community gatherings celebrated the survival of the colony. Festivals that had been interrupted by the invasion were resumed, now infused with new meaning. Music, art, and storytelling reflected the struggle, the courage, and the hope that had defined these weeks of crisis. The SOS beacon, previously an overlooked relic, became a centerpiece in public spaces, a symbol of perseverance, ingenuity, and the idea that even the smallest actions could have monumental consequences. The colonists' shared trauma transformed into a shared identity, creating a sense of resilience that would endure for generations. Psychologically, the people of Orion 7 underwent profound changes. The weeks of fear, hunger, and despair had left scars, but they had also forged strength. Citizens became more aware of their own capacity for courage and adaptability. Families who had faced near-certain destruction developed a new sense of unity, and resistance fighters who had risked their lives discovered the importance of strategy, patience, and leadership. Trauma was real and lasting, but so too was pride. Orion 7 had survived against overwhelming odds, and the memory of those dark days became a source of inspiration rather than defeat. Survivors understood that the story of the battle, the beacon, and the Deathworlder intervention would be told for decades, shaping the identity of the colony and its culture. The political structure of the colony also evolved. Leadership councils, previously limited to administrative matters, now assumed the responsibility of organizing recovery and future defense. Decisions about resource allocation, rebuilding priorities, and community protection were made collaboratively, incorporating lessons learned from the crisis. Citizens recognized the importance of strategic planning and preparedness, understanding that vigilance must continue even after the immediate danger had passed. Leaders encouraged training, drills, and the maintenance of emergency systems, ensuring that Orion 7 would never again be caught so unprepared. The broader implications of the survival of Orion 7 reached beyond the planet itself. The stories of the invasion, the desperate SOS, and the intervention of the Deathworlder fleet spread across nearby star systems. Neighboring colonies took note, learning that even the most isolated outposts could reach out for help, and that humanity, despite its vast distances, did not abandon its own. Orion 7 became a symbol of resilience, hope, and the enduring power of human ingenuity and courage. Scholars, strategists, and leaders from other worlds studied the events in detail, seeking lessons in diplomacy, defense, and survival. The colony's experience became a reference point, a case study in perseverance and collective action against overwhelming threats. Psychologically and emotionally, citizens found ways to process the trauma of what they had endured. Rituals, memorials, and storytelling allowed people to honor those who had been lost, celebrate the survival of others, and solidify the lessons learned. People who had faced seemingly insurmountable fear discovered that courage, determination, and cooperation could overcome even the most formidable obstacles. The memory of the Clavor threat and the intervention of the Deathworlders became a foundational story for the colonial story of hope, resilience, and humanity's refusal to accept defeat. Even practical survival skills, once overlooked, gained newfound importance. Training in emergency response, resource management, and strategic defense became standard practice. Citizens who had experienced the invasion firsthand became teachers and mentors, ensuring that knowledge would be passed down. Children learned about courage, resourcefulness, and community responsibility in ways no traditional classroom could provide. The SOS beacon, once a historical relic, became both a symbol and a practical tool, maintained and ready for any future emergencies. Lessons learned during the invasion informed the design of infrastructure, city planning, and community organization, creating a more resilient and prepared society. The arrival of the Deathworlder fleet remained a central point of reflection. Their intervention demonstrated the importance of being prepared, reaching out for help, and trusting in the possibility of aid even in the darkest moments. Citizens marveled at the skill, coordination, and power of these legendary humans, recognizing that their presence had saved the colony from annihilation. The fleet's actions left a lasting impression, instilling a sense of awe and gratitude. People reflected on the lesson that while courage, unity, and ingenuity could protect a society, external support could make the difference between survival and destruction. Over time, Orion 7's population rebuilt its cities, restored its infrastructure, and resumed daily life. Markets opened, schools flourished, and cultural activities returned. Yet the memory of the invasion, the resilience of the citizens, and the arrival of the Deathworlder fleet continued to shape every aspect of life. Citizens were more cautious, more prepared, and more united than ever before. They had experienced the brink of extinction and emerged stronger, their society tempered like steel in a forge. Every street, rebuilt home, and public gathering became a testament to the enduring human spirit. The psychological, cultural, and practical lessons of the invasion and the fleet's intervention were deeply intertwined. Citizens reflected not only on the horrors of the attack but also on their ability to endure, adapt, and survive. They remembered the courage of their neighbors, the ingenuity of engineers, and the bravery of resistance fighters. They celebrated the arrival of help at the critical moment and acknowledged that hope, determination, and unity had been the keys to survival. This reflection created a society that was not only resilient but also wiser, more strategic, and more appreciative of life. Orion 7 had fully transitioned from a colony in peril to a society strengthened by its experiences. The aftermath was not simply about rebuilding physical structures, it was about reconstructing a sense of community, identity, and purpose. The colonists had faced annihilation and survived, learning lessons that would guide them for generations. The SOS beacon remained a symbol of hope, the Deathworlder fleet a symbol of protection, and the courage of ordinary citizens a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity could endure. The people of Orion 7 reflected on their journey from isolation and fear to struggle and resilience, to salvation and renewal. They recognized that every small effort, every act of courage, and every ounce of determination had contributed to their survival. The memory of the Claver invasion and the arrival of the Deathworlders became a story that would be told for generations, shaping the culture, values, and identity of the planet. Hope, unity, and perseverance had triumphed over despair, creating a legacy that would inspire not only Orion 7 but the wider galaxy for years to come.